Hi, Mirabai. Thanks for coming on and talking with me today.
I'm happy to be here.
So, like I said to you before, I read your book, "Walking Each Other Home," the book that you wrote with Ram Dass on dying and handling that process and supporting others in doing so as well. But before we get into that, I was just interested to go into a little bit of your background. So, what was your path into spirituality like? What got you started?
It's a long story. I'll keep it short. I I was in graduate school in the late '60s, '67 to '70, and you may have heard in your history books that that was a very a radical time, and
Mm-hmm.
I got involved in civil rights and anti-war work and psychedelics. So all of that made it difficult to do a traditional uh, graduate study. Um, and I was also teaching. Um, and it just really, it was chaotic. And in 1970, on our campus and others around the country, the police took over the campus. Can you imagine that now? But that happened. And so um, it was impossible to teach, and it was just hard, you know. So with the person who was then my partner, boyfriend, um, I decided to I wanted to travel a little and see if anywhere uh, on the planet people knew like a more compassionate, sane way to live, and
Yeah.
so um, we went to Europe, and then we traveled overland from London to Delhi. Um, in those years, there were these kind of hippie buses going across, Magic Bus, they were called, going all the way across. And at that time, you could go through Europe and then the former Yugoslavia, and then Turkey and Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and into India, and every place was peaceful. Amazing, huh? And uh, and every place also, people still really loved Americans. Not so true anymore. And
Right.
people in these little tiny villages with like sheep everywhere, they'd have a little picture of Kennedy on their little altar,
Wow.
whatever. Yeah, JFK was like, he was like a saint internationally. Um, and so, uh, anyhow, it was a great journey, and people took us into their homes and their mosques and their churches, and um, we began to um, understand a basic truth that as as unique as we each are, there's something that we all share that's very deep. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, and so we got to India, and I hadn't really grown up thinking much about India at all, but um, some people had, some at that time, not a lot, but some Westerners were going to India and intentionally. Sharon went there specifically to learn to meditate. But she and I had been at the same college at SUNY Buffalo. But she was an undergraduate, and in American Studies, she probably told you that then in American Studies, you had to spend a year out of the country looking back at America, too, in order to get your degree. I think that's brilliant. But, and I don't think they do it anymore. But,
No. Yeah.
but anyhow, we got to Delhi, and on the first day I was there, I was walking around uh, Connaught Place in Delhi, the center of town, and saw these other Westerners. And in those times, there weren't very many. So we went up to each other and introduced, and that was Sharon Salzberg, and her then boyfriend. And uh, So cool. And she told us that she had just heard about that a Burmese Buddhist teacher in Bodh Gaya was going to teach a course for Westerners for the first time. And she had heard it from Dan Goleman, who'd been there for a yoga conference. So we thought, we didn't really know what we were going to do in India. And it was a little bit like, wine and cheese in Paris. Well, we'll do meditation in India. So
Yeah.
I say that to say that I wasn't on a mission to become spiritual or learn to meditate or any of it. I was just looking for, a way of being, which is maybe.
Yeah.
And so, so we went to that retreat, and it was extraordinary. The teacher was Goenka, and he taught in these 10-day courses, and there was like no speaking, of course, it's silent, and no, I don't know anything, no reading, no writing, we ate 2 meals a day. We didn't do anything but meditate. And and there were about 70, I don't know the number, I think it was about 70 Westerners there who had all come for a lot of the same reasons that we were there. And Ram Dass was there, and others who became my lifetime friends, Krishna Das and Sharon and Joseph Goldstein and many others. But now, when I think about it, we were sitting on the floor. There was like a thin, like dory rug, and we were sitting on the floor for what it was 12 hours a day or something, real close to each other. Everybody fit into this room, meditating. And now, of course, in meditation centers, there are these big fluffy zafus and a zabuton underneath it.
Yeah.
That people have their whole thing worked out. But we just sat down on the floor, closed our eyes, and started meditating. Well, by the end of the 10 days, I realized it was just so radical. It was so amazing. I had been a student of literature, so by the time I left, I was in the 4th year of my PhD, and I had read hundreds of books, right? I was always looking. But before that, I'd studied philosophy at Penn, and I was always looking for the answer in some book, outside myself. To be able to look into my own mind and discover anything that had to do with the truth or the way that things are was just radically awakening to me. And we all went through variations on that experience, because hardly anybody there had meditated before. And even Ram Dass, who had been in India before, hadn't done anything intensive like this. So, so at the end of the time, we asked Goenka if he'd teach another one, and he did. And then we did another one, and we did 4, I think, in a row. And so from the time of walking in, when I didn't know that I could sit down for 5 minutes and be quiet, to 40 days later or so, it was quite amazing. And I just realized that there was a different way of being in the world, that not only did it cultivate like attention, but it also awakened compassion, love, awareness of interconnection, and awareness of the impermanence of everything. Just watching thoughts arise and fall away. Stunning, So, that was the beginning for me of changing the way I was in the world.
So, with the instruction for meditation, was it just sitting and focusing on your breath? Was there something else to it? What approach was it?
He taught Vipassana, which was, and the way he taught it was the first 3 days we focused on our breath coming in and out of the nostrils, just noticing the breath and letting go of any thoughts, emotions, memories, whatever, and just coming back to the breath. So 3 days. And then so in order to increase your attention. And then at the end of 3 days, he teaches a practice of, he called it sweeping through your body. You notice, you take your mind into your body and you notice, not try to relax, but just notice what you feel from within your body, starting at the top of your head and then noticing everything all the way. It'd take a long time to get to your feet, and then you sweep back up again. And you do that for 7 days.
Yeah.
And then I think there was like on day 8 or something, we learned loving kindness meditation. By that time, we had a good awareness of our own self/non-self, and
Right.
and then in the loving kindness practice, you bring other people to mind, and then you send out wishes for well-being for other people. And that was also amazing for me. I loved it. So, yeah.
So was the method kind of, you're bringing this level of awareness and feeling within yourself, and then over time that then develops into the loving kindness, which is a method for radiating that feeling that you've cultivated within yourself out to other people.
Yeah, and they're all practices. So it's like what you do is you notice as you are, if I'm sending good wishes to to someone who I care about, who it's easy to send it to. Then I just notice what that feels like. I notice what I'm feeling about the other person, any emotions or memories that arise. I'm noticing how I get distracted by other things and have to bring my mind back to doing that. And I notice how it feels in my body, and this kind of feeling of warmth as you focus on your heart and sending love to others. And then part of the practice is to bring to mind someone who's very difficult for you. And over the years, I've found the practices were really helpful for this. You bring someone, in the classic text, they call it your enemy, but it's anybody you're having a hard time with, and then you repeat the same phrases, but so I'm sending, I'm wishing that you be happy and healthy and safe. But of course, if you're sending all that to somebody who you really have a hard time with, you notice how hard that is to do. You can barely say the phrases. I was struggling many years later. I was struggling with someone, and I was trying so hard because other than practice, I didn't know any way to get past this. My mind wasn't coming up with any solutions. So I do the practice and nothing was happening. I could not send him anything good. Sharon said, because she's the master or the mistress, the queen of love and kindness. She said, try this. In as much as I can, I wish that you be happy. And of course, I could say that because in the beginning, as much as I could was like almost nothing. But then you just keep doing it, and it expanded. And it wasn't, after some days of weeks of doing it, it wasn't like I wanted to be with this person, but
right.
I was no longer carrying around that closed-heartedness which affects you more than the other person. You know? So
Right.
it's a powerful practice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've just recently learned about. I'm very much in the infancy stages of it. I've only done it a handful of times, but in the times that I have, it's a very interesting feeling that you get from that. And I like that point that you mentioned of it doesn't mean that you have to be close with that person. It doesn't mean that you have to like want to hang out with that person and be around each other all the time. But
Yeah.
the feelings that you have are different. It's just like I'm going this way, that person's going that way, and we're good. Like there's less poison that you're holding on to that you're letting burden
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Because with all those negative emotions, you know, people you can't forgive, you know, people you're just angry at, whatever, um, you're the one who suffers from it. You know, they
Hmm.
don't even know you're feeling that. And if they do,
Yeah.
sometimes they don't care. But,
Yeah.
um, but you have to carry that around. It feels awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So from that place, after doing these practices and having these experiences, and you're finding something that really resonates with you, like you said, a way of being. I really like that phrase, that way of thinking about it. Where do you go from there?
Well, where I went from there was to meet Neem Karoli Baba, who was Ram Dass's teacher, who he'd met in a former trip to India. And Goenka was very much against gurus. So he was a Buddhist in a Hindu country. And there were, for sure, and in India in those years, everybody had a guru. That was just like part of how you lived your life. And,
Mm.
but of course, there were lots of fraudulent gurus, you know.
Yeah.
And I think he had seen other Westerners come to India looking for someone to tell them everything and how to live their lives and, you know, and take advantage of it. And so he was very fierce about you don't need a guru. And he was also repeating what the Buddha had said. All you need is someone a little ahead of you on the path who knows these practices and can teach them to you and can help
Hmm.
you and walk you home. And so I didn't know. And so I definitely didn't think I wanted a guru. And then I was with Ram Dass. We were on a bus, and we met Maharaji, and that was a familiar name for him. And I don't know, in the moment I met him, he was just, my sense of what it can mean to be human just expanded. He was like beyond anything I could imagine even wanting to be. And yet, he was like this ordinary person wrapped up in a blanket, which it was India, so you could do that. And, but, um, but there was something about him. He was so utterly present, and that presence was so loving. I had just never experienced it, and I just knew that everything I thought this life was about and what I could be, and, there was much more to it than that, and that he knew, and that I just wanted to be around him for a while, see if I could discover some of that. And so I had gone to India for, I thought, 2 weeks, and I stayed for 2 years. And he was, really, many people have read about him from Ram Dass. He was really wonderful.
Yeah. So my understanding of him is that he didn't really give many teachings. You have the classic love, serve, remember, but it seemed like it was mostly from him just being around somebody that embodied a certain kind of state and that was able to rub off onto you. And
Yeah.
that was really where the main teaching came from.
Yeah. In India, they understood this, the experience of being with another person, and just from being with that person, now, scientists here, neuroscientists in particular, have discovered, well, Danny Goleman talks about mirror neurons, that just being in the presence of each other, we're actually we're not just exchanging ideas, but we're actually changing, our neurons,
Yeah.
our cells. I used to feel that, and I always thought it was a kind of silly metaphor. Like, I'd say, I feel like my cells have all been rearranged, But that was, I think, actually what was happening. And then, of course, he didn't teach any practices. He just, when I was leaving to go home, I said, what should I do? And he said, love everyone. Okay.
Was that frustrating? Was there a time when you're like, that's it? Like, is that all? Like, or did you get it just from the feeling? Like, I feel like originally I probably would be uncomfortable with that because I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Well, being around him, whatever he said seemed perfect, But, of course, after it was like, what? But I did go one time to him. I got pregnant while I was in India from my partner. I said somewhere. It was very unusual because we were all like sleeping like 10 people in a room on the floor. It was like funky. But one night we happened to be alone, so it didn't even occur to me that I was pregnant. And there weren't any doctors around, So anyhow, eventually I figured it out. So I went to Maharaji and I said, Maharaji, I'm pregnant. What should I do? And I thought he would give me like some special mantra or something. And he said, all of a sudden he turned into like a concerned grandfather. He said, you should be married. He said, you should be married and I'll marry you tomorrow. So we had to go to the bazaar and get a ring and do the whole thing. Krishnadas plays the kirtan and
oh, that's so cool. What a wedding story. That's an amazing wedding story.
It's amazing, yeah. And they do a great thing in India. All the guests arrive with a lei, that's Hawaiian, but I forget what they call it in India, but flowers on a string, and they arrive wearing them, and then after you're married, then they take them off and they put them all on the bride and groom. So the bride and groom are standing there with 50 layers of flowers. It's so cool. Yeah. So, but that was a time when I expected, at last I'm going to get a special practice, You should sorry.
Yeah, those stories of him are so funny. Yeah, I've just hearing about this. He just implants these simple messages that if you actually take them to heart, that's really all you need. It's like this perfect simplicity and minimalism to these teachings instead of like you said you read a lot of books in school. I've kind of gone down the same road, and I'm reaching this point where eventually I'm like, it kind of feels like they're all just pointing at the same thing, and once you get it, then you don't even need all the words anyway.
Yeah.
It seems like he was somebody who taught from that place.
Absolutely. Yeah, he did. And of course, love everyone. Then we got back here and we had to translate that into what does it mean to live in this country and love everyone.
Right.
I'm, of course, still working on it. But,
yeah.
It affects every single moment of the day and every person I meet and all of it, It was great advice, it turns out. You can't go wrong.
It's such a good mantra, the one that he has. It kind of blew me away the first time I read about it not too long ago. I was like, oh, that's really all you have to focus on, and then you kind of figure out how to apply that in your own way.
Yeah, exactly. And of course that is a full-time job.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So much later on, you guys you and Ram Dass get together and write Walking Each Other Home. How did that book come about?
Well, before that, we had done many things together. We traveled together, we taught, and Ram Dass was really instrumental in developing or helping to support all these new education centers like Omega and Esalen and all these places around the country that were growing up to teach meditation, yoga, and so on. And so we taught together in lots of those places, and together we, with others, started Seva Foundation, which was the organization to Maharaji did say, love everyone and serve everyone. So we were always looking for ways to do that. And so we founded with others Seva Foundation, which worked in blindness mainly in India and Nepal. And then through that period, we wrote a book together called Compassion in Action, which was, as Ram Dass started talking about service as a path, and people wanted to know, what can I do? How can I help? And so we wrote that book about that. And then many things happened in between. And then he had a stroke, and that was 25 years ago or something. And, it was a massive stroke. They didn't think he'd survive. But he was amazing. It's like both his body and mind just, they didn't come back in the sense that, he was paralyzed on one side, he was in a wheelchair, he couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And he had all kinds of things wrong with his body. And he had aphasia, so he couldn't talk. A lot of words he couldn't find, so he had to very simply with a lot of silences. But he mastered that, and it was so great. I just early got used to those silences. We should have more of them, in between ideas and thoughts, and just then this quiet, so great. And anyhow, during that time, then he lived in Maui, and then he wanted to keep teaching in some way because he had loved doing that. And so we started doing these retreats in Maui where people would come to him. And we brought in other people to share the teaching because he couldn't hold the place for, all day long or something. So, anyhow, so we taught together at those retreats for years. Sharon was also often there. And then a few years before he died, he'd written so many books, and he was a brilliant, charismatic speaker. And so, oh my God, but in the early days, he'd start talking. He could talk with no notes for 5 hours, and people they were hanging on his every word. It was crazy. So he missed that, but he couldn't do what he used to do. And he had been a professor at Harvard before, and he and Tim Leary were working on psychedelics and consciousness. They were studying it. And then he did what he wasn't supposed to do, which was he gave psychedelics to one of his undergraduate students, and Harvard fired him. And he always, in telling his story, he always talked about how first psychedelics and then meeting Maharaji and so on, that everything changed for him, and then he started speaking about these things. But I talked to people later on who'd been his students at Harvard all that long ago, and they said he was amazing even then. So he's teaching adolescent psychology. Um,
Hmm.
so anyhow, we design these retreats, and we do that every year. And then toward the end, he was reflecting on like his legacy, basically. You know, what books he had written and what he had said. And I think he'd always talked about dying. Even in Be Here Now, it's pretty. The words are all there. I mean, I went back. I hadn't
Yeah.
read it in years, and I went back and read it, and he really knew it at some level then. But we know the difference. Well, you're in school. You know the difference between being able to say it and knowing it. You know.
Right.
And so Ram Dass felt like there were things that he really knew about aging and dying. Now that he was 89 when he died, and so we started this book like 3 or 4 years before that. And he said, you know, I want to do, I want to write one last book, and I want to put in it what I know now about dying. And because, you know, it's hard to hear anything about dying for any of us because none of us want to. And he said, I want to say it in a way that people will be able to hear it better if they can hear it at all. So then we knew he couldn't write like essay like writing or chapter writing.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we decided then we'd just have conversations about dying and see what happened. And we made this vow to each other that we would only, I'll say what I know and not say what I don't know, which is a very demanding guideline.
Yeah.
In graduate school, I probably would have been completely silent the whole time. So we did that, you know, and you read the book, so you know. And it was really, well, it was a total blessing to be with him in that zone. You know, I'd go up to his room in the mornings, and I was living in Massachusetts, so I'd go back and forth and spend a couple of weeks at a time in Maui, and just go up and in the morning, and then we'd just start talking. And anytime you're with a good friend and you bring up things that really matter to you, you know, it's a sacred space. So
Yeah.
so that's how we did it. And then he'd joke, and he'd say, we'd say, this is taking a long time, because there's so many silences. We'd say, he'd say, but Mirabai, this time we have a real deadline. I say, just stay alive until the book comes out. But it was real. So, in fact, he did.
He made it.
It came out in 2018. He died in 2019, and he had the time to like sign people's books, and you know, it was really great. Yeah.
So, in putting that together in those conversations, how did you guys navigate like what to talk about? Were you guys just kind of thinking out loud and exploring these ideas just as they came to you, and just kind of venturing into this topic, just how you saw fit in the moment for each conversation?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was easy because it was so much. You just started talking, and it would lead here and there. But then after a while, I started thinking about, you know, more about what people's concerns are about dying, and what we should be sure and include, like, you know, a chapter on grieving, you know, a chapter on, you know, on what's important to let go of before you die, something about forgiveness, things that didn't necessarily arise spontaneously, but were obviously, you know, part of it. So there was some, you know, there was some work around organizing it and making sure everything got included that was obviously not everything got included, but like the main themes.
Yeah.
Um, but mainly when I would do that, I'd say let's talk about forgiveness today, and then we just go, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it was easy because he had thought about and spoken about all these things so much, and now he was going through it. Like
Yeah.
he was trying to figure, is there anybody I haven't forgiven? And he was like, because I'm going to die soon, and I really want to know. So it was great motivation, you know.
Yeah, he had worked with dying people for a long time, as far
Yeah.
as I understand. What was it about this dying process that interested him so much? Why was he so passionate about that?
You know, he says something in the book that not many people have said anything to me about, but I thought it was a revelatory. He said the reason he started sitting with dying people was in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic. And friends asked him to do that and help, and so many people were dying then. He was in San Francisco. Um, and he said at one point, you know, like I said, because, you know, he was gay, and and he he grew up in the 40s, and he went to prep school, and it was not a good time to be a gay boy. And he just got, in prep school, I remember he said some of the boys like beat him with hangers, and then he pretty much stayed in the closet. When he said, then when he moved out of it a little, he said he was bisexual, and he had some women friends, and he never, it was hard for him to really fully own it because of that background, you know. 10 years later, it was a little better, but then it was really hard. And so, but anyhow, so people asked him, and he was out, of course, by the time the AIDS came, but people asked him to sit with these various people who were dying, and he did, but he said, with this kind of like a mischievous grin on his face, he said, you know, the real reason I did that, I wanted to be with those guys. You know, I really like those guys. I wanted to be close to them. And I never said that before. I don't know if I ever knew that before, but that's how I got into being with the dying. It was so sweet. And so, you know, yeah. But then he did start this center, Living Dying Center. The idea was we were going to start a center for dying, and he knew the folks at the Zen Hospice in San Francisco, and they were working with dying people. So he wanted to start, and he wanted to start a dying center where the people who were dying would be doing practice and waking up through their dying, and the people who were caring for them would also be seeing it as a practice of service, a practice of, you know, waking. And then there were mostly people like died in hospitals in the worst way, you know. And so we wanted to create this environment that was beautiful and that was natural, and there were kind people taking care of you and feeding you, and so we did the whole thing. And then we recruited, in the beginning, 6 or 8 people. It was a house in San Francisco. And after some while, people said, well, how's it going, Ram Dass? He said, nobody's dying. They're all enjoying it too much. They're not dying. So we had to figure out a different model.
His humor is what really stuck out to me when I first started listening to him. Like you mentioned, how prolific of a speaker he was, and the first I ever had come across from him was just lectures, and it hooked me right away. And like he had that way of like you talk about this honesty and this like humor and lightness that he had in speaking. That was so compelling and so unique. I mean, to me, the first time that I heard his lecture, I was like, this guy, he sounds like a stand-up comic. Like it sounds like he's like setting up punchlines, and he's so interesting. And while being able to deliver these messages at the same time was something that was really compelling to me. In dealing with a topic like death, which is often approached and thought about kind of morbidly, what was the role of that kind of humor and lightness in your guys' conversations?
Well, it was very present because it's absurd and humorous that we go through life every day ignoring, denying that we are all going to die. And we go along, living our lives as if that's not going to happen, most of us, and taking everything terribly seriously, and it's funny. I mean, that we take it all so seriously, and that we get so caught up in it, when it's not that we shouldn't use all of our energy to do what is the best thing we could be doing on this planet right now. That's true. Mm-hmm. And it's also true that we're just here for a short time, and getting attached to things being a certain way and putting so much energy into that is funny.
Yeah. How much of that just comes from getting too wrapped up in your own thinking in your own mind? Like, what kind of a role does just mindfulness play in dealing with this process? It seems like at any time that you're able to have that kind of awareness, that lightness and that humor, just it kind of comes out naturally, and all of the worrying that you're kind of alluding to just falls away of itself.
Yeah. I mean, that is part of the process of, and particularly with like the basic mindfulness practices of watching your mind and trying to focus on your body or your breath, and then watching what arises, and just like seeing how resistant your mind is to being quiet for 15 minutes. It's just like
brutal.
It'll do anything it can, to get your attention. And,
yeah.
And the more you let it go, the better it gets at coming up with something even better, And after a while, just seeing that process is, it's poignant and painful, but it's also amusing, because there's a level at which it's just mind, it's just thoughts. They rise and they fall away. What are they? And where did they go? You begin to see that, and, the way in which we get so emotionally responsive to different things, forgetting the way in which it's all impermanent, it comes and it goes. And, our work is to be here in the moment, each moment, with as much like awareness and love as we can bring, and with the intention to relieve as much suffering as possible and to not cause more.
Yeah, I like what you said about forgetting, and this idea that it's like that you kind of already know. It's not like you don't have to necessarily go and figure anything out. It's just about like getting everything else out of the way, and the understanding is already there.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes a lot of patience and commitment to be with it long enough to see it. But, there's a level at which what else is there to do?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so satisfying. That's not the word, but when you can rest in that awareness for some time, it's so relieving, of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that you don't do a lot of good things with your life. It really means that you're able to see more clearly what it is you have to offer and what's being called for from the world, and then to figure out how to do that. I've worked a lot with activists of different kinds, and the first thought is, it's selfish. Meditating. It doesn't have to do with you're not changing anything in the world, but after a while you begin to see, and it doesn't take that long, you begin to see that this awareness allows you to see what's happening in this moment, what is actually happening, and then what could I do to change the part of it that is causing suffering. So.
Yeah, it makes sense when that criticism comes up, but it seems to me like it's the most direct way to kind of fine-tune a certain state of mind that at least for me personally that I'm in, and everything that I do comes out of that state. So to me it seems like the most important place to start.
Yep.
All right, so I'll have the book linked and then your website linked. Along with that, do you have anything else that you'd like to let people know about?
I think that's good. Yeah, link to the Be Here Now. You can link to my website, mirabaibush.com,
mm-hmm.
and
okay.
the maybe the podcast on Be Here Now Network, because I don't know if you listen to any of them, but there's some great people that I interviewed. I loved it. Yeah, some really fabulous people. So I always like to share that. And they're on YouTube also. You can do that, You can put all these Zoom interviews on YouTube. And then when people are on there looking for something else, they'll pop up, say, just listen to this now.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the work that you do in writing this book. It was a pleasure to read, so thanks a lot.
Thank you. I don't say yes to, there are a lot of podcasts. Some reason I just thought you were going to be really good, and you were. Thank you.
Thank you.